What's going on, good people? What's going on, babe? Let me make sure this thing ain't doing that funny ass noise. Is it doing the funny ass noise? No, it is not. Good. Alright, let's get this party started. It is what it is. We do what it do. I'm just here to talk to you about what's really real. Fuck all that bullshit. We've been bullshit all our fucking life. Let's go.
Co-founder of the social news and entertainment website Reddit has been found dead.
He certainly was a prodigy, although he never kind of thought of himself like that.
He was totally unexcited about starting businesses and making money.
There's a profound sense of loss tonight in Highland Park, Aaron Swartz's hometown, as loved ones say goodbye to one of the internet's brightest lights.
Open access and computer activists are mourning his loss.
An astonishing intellect. You talk to people who knew him. He was killed by the government, and MIT betrayed all of its basic principles.
They wanted to make an example out of him, okay?
Governments have an insatiable desire to control.
He was potentially facing 35 years in prison and a $1 million fine.
Raising questions of prosecutorial zeal and I would say even misconduct. Have you looked into that particular matter and reached any conclusions?
Growing up, I slowly had this process of realizing that all the things around me that people had told me were just the natural way things were, or the way things always would be. They weren't natural at all. They were things that could be changed, and they were things that, more importantly, were wrong and should change. And once I realized that, there was really kind of no going back.
Welcome to Stories Reading Time. The name of the book is Paddington at the Fair.
Well, he was born in Highland Park and grew up here. Aaron came from a family of 3 brothers, all extraordinarily bright.
So we were all, not the best behaved children and, 3 boys running around all the time, causing trouble. But I've come to the realization Aaron learned how to learn at a very young age.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Knock, knock. Who's there? Aaron. Aaron, funny man.
He knew what he wanted, and he always wanted to do it. He always accomplished what he wanted. His curiosity was endless.
Here's a little picture of what the planets are. Each planet has a symbol. Mercury symbol, Venus symbol, Earth symbol, Mars symbol, Jupiter symbol.
One day he said to Susan, "What's this free family entertainment in downtown Highland Park?"
Free family entertainment downtown Highland Park.
He was 3 at the time, and she said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Look, it says here on the refrigerator, free family entertainment in downtown Highland Park." And so she was floored and astonished that he could read.
It's called My Family Seder. The Seder night is different from all other nights.
I remember once we were at the University of Chicago Library. I pulled a book off the shelf that was from like 1900 and showed him and said, this is really just an extraordinary place.
We all were curious children, but Aaron really liked learning and really liked teaching.
And so they were going to learn the ABCs backwards. D-Y-S-W-B-U-T.
I remember he came home from his first algebra class, and he was like, "Noah, let me teach you algebra." And I'm like, "What is algebra?" And he was always like that.
Now it's press 9 press the click button. There, now it's got that. Now it's in pink.
When he was about 2 or 3 years old and Bob introduced him to computers, then he just took off like crazy on them.
We all had computers, but Aaron really took to them. Really took to the internet.
Looking at the computer?
Mommy, why is nothing working?
He started programming from a really young age. I remember the first program that I wrote with him was in BASIC, and it was a Star Wars trivia game. He sat down with me in the basement where the computer was for hours programming this game. The problem that I kept having with him is there was nothing that I wanted done. And to him, there was always something to do, always something that programming could solve. The way Aaron always saw it is that programming is magic, right? You can accomplish these things that normal humans can't.
Aaron made an ATM using like a Macintosh and like a cardboard box.
One year for Halloween, I didn't know what I wanted to be, and he thought it'd be really, really cool if I dressed up like his new favorite computer, which at the time was the original iMac. I mean, he hated dressing up for Halloween, but he loved convincing other people to dress up as things that he wanted to see.
He made this website called tHE, where people can just fill in information. Like, I'm sure someone out there knows all about gold leafing. Why don't they write about that on this website?
And then other people could come at a later point and read that information and edit the information if they thought it was bad. Not too dissimilar from Wikipedia, right? And this was before Wikipedia had begun, and this was developed by a 12-year-old in his room by himself, running on, this tiny server using ancient technology.
And one of the teachers responds like, "This is a terrible idea. You can't just let anyone author the encyclopedia. The whole reason we have scholars is to write these books for us. Yep. How could you ever have such a terrible idea?" No. Me and my other brother would be like, "Oh, yeah, Wikipedia is cool, but we had that in our house 5 years ago."
Aaron's website, theinfo.org, wins a school competition hosted by the Cambridge-based web design firm Ars Digita.
We all went to Cambridge for when he won the Ars Digita Prize, and we had no clue what Aaron was doing. It was obvious that the prize was really important.
Aaron soon became involved with online programming communities, then in the process of shaping a new tool for the web.
He comes up to me, it's like, "Ben, this really awesome thing that I'm working on. You need to hear about it." I'm like, "Yeah, what is it?" He says, "It's this thing called RSS." And he explains to me what RSS is. I'm like, why is that useful, Aaron? Is any site using it? Why would I want to use it?
There was this mailing list for people who were working on RSS and XML more generally, and there was a person on it named Aaron Swartz who was competitive but very smart and who had lots of good ideas, and he didn't ever come to the face-to-face meetings. And they said, when are you going to come out to one of these face-to-face meetings? And he said, I don't think my mom would let me. I'm 14, I just turned 14. And so their first reaction was, this colleague we've been working with all year was 13 years old while we were working with him, and he's only 14 now. And their second reaction was, Christ, we really want to meet him. That's extraordinary. He was part of the committee that drafted RSS.
What he was doing was to help build the plumbing for modern hypertext. And the piece that he was working on, RSS, was a tool that you can use to get summaries of things that are going on in other web pages. Most commonly, you would use this for a blog. You might have 10 or 20 people's blogs you want to read. You use their RSS feeds, these summaries of what's going on those other pages, to create a unified list of all the stuff that's going on. Aaron was really young, but he understood the technology, and he saw that it was imperfect and looked for ways to help make it better.
So his mom started bundling him on planes in Chicago. We'd pick him up in San Francisco. We'd introduce him to interesting people to argue with, and we'd marvel at his horrific eating habits. He only ate white food, only like, steamed rice and not fried rice because that wasn't sufficiently white, and white bread and so on. And, you kind of marvel at this, the quality of the debate emerging from this, what appeared to be a small boy's mouth. And you think, this is a kid who's really going to go somewhere if he doesn't die of scurvy.
Aaron, you're up. I think the difference is that now you can't make companies like Doc was saying. You can't have companies that just, let's sell dog food over the internet, let's sell dog food over cell phones. But there's still a lot of innovation going on. I think if you don't see the innovation, maybe your head is in the sand.
He takes on this alpha nerd personality where he's sort of like, I'm smarter than you, and because I'm smarter than you, I'm better than you, and I can tell you what to do. It's an extension.
We took things up with our new signature sriracha sandwich.
With that bullshit. Nobody don't want nothing for no fucking McDonald's.
It's topped with crispy onions, fresh baby spinach, and kale. Then we took it up some more with an exclusive sriracha mac sauce. Now McDonald's.
I don't want to see the rest of this commercial. Y'all making motherfuckers see commercials on the internet. That's going to show you how much fucking.
I'm smarter than you, I'm better than you, and I can tell you what to do. It's an extension of, him being kind of like a twerp.
So you aggregate all these computers together and now they're solving these problems, like searching for aliens and trying to cure cancer.
He didn't just write code. He also sort of got people excited about solving problems. He was a connector. The free culture movement, which had a lot of his energy, I think Aaron was trying to make the world work. He was trying to fix it.
He had a very kind of strong personality that definitely ruffled feathers at times. It wasn't necessarily the case that he was always comfortable in the world and the world wasn't always comfortable with him.
Aaron got into high school and was really just sick of school. He didn't like it. He didn't like any of the classes that were being taught. He didn't like the teachers. Aaron really knew how to get information. He was like, I don't need to go to this teacher to learn how to do geometry. I can just read the geometry book, and I don't need to go to the teacher to learn their version of American history. I have 3 historical compilations here. I could just read them, and I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the web.
I was very frustrated with school. I thought, the teachers didn't know what they were talking about, and they were very domineering and controlling, and the homework was kind of a sham, and it was just all the way to pen students together and force them to do busy work. And, I started reading books about, the history of education and how this educational system was developed, and, alternatives to it in ways that people could actually learn things as opposed to just regurgitating facts their teachers told them. And that kind of led me down this path of questioning things. Once I questioned the school I was in, I questioned the society that built the school, I questioned the businesses that the schools were training people for, and I questioned the government that, set up this whole structure.
One of the things he was most passionate about was copyright, especially in those early days.
Copyright has always been something of a burden on the publishing industry and on readers, but it wasn't an excessive burden. It was a reasonable institution to have in place to make sure that people got paid. What Aaron's generation experienced was the collision between this antique copyright system and this amazing new thing we were trying to build, the internet and the web. These things collided, and what we got was chaos.
He then met Harvard law professor Lawrence Lessig, who was then challenging copyright law in the Supreme Court. A young Aaron Swartz flew to Washington to listen to the Supreme Court hearings.
I am Aaron Swartz, and I'm here to listen to see the Eldred argument.
Why did you fly out here from Chicago and come all this way to see the Eldred argument?
That's a more difficult question. See the Eldred. Because I don't know. It's very exciting to see the Supreme Court, especially such a prestigious case as this one.
Lessig was also moving forward with a new way to define copyright on the internet. It was called Creative Commons.
So the simple idea of Creative Commons is to give people, creators, a simple way to mark their creativity with the freedoms they intended to carry. So if copyright is all about all rights reserved, then this is a kind of some rights reserved model. I want a simple way to say to you, here's what you can do with my work. even if there are other things which you need to get my permission before you could do. And Aaron's role was the computer part. Like, how do you architect the licenses so they would be simple and understandable and expressed in a way that machines could process it?
And people are like, why do you have this, 15-year-old kid writing the specifications for the Creative Commons? Like, don't you think that's a huge mistake? And Larry's like, the biggest mistake we would have is not listening to this kid.
He barely is not even tall enough to get over the podium, and it wasn't these movable podiums, so it was this embarrassing thing where once he put his screen up, nobody could see his face.
When you come to our website here, and you go to choose license, it gives you this list of options, it explains what it means, and you fill out 3 simple questions. Do you want to require attribution? Do you want to allow commercial uses of your work? Do you want to allow modifications of your work?
I was floored, just completely flabbergasted that these adults regarded him as an adult. And Aaron stood up there in front of a whole audience full of people and just started talking about the platform that he created for Creative Commons. And they were all listening to him. I was sitting at the back thinking, he's just a kid, why are they listening to him? But they did. Well, I don't think I comprehended it fully.
Though critics have said it does little to ensure artists get paid for their work, the success of Creative Commons has been enormous. Currently on the website Flickr alone, over 200 million people use some form of Creative Commons license.
He contributed through his technical abilities, and yet it was not simply a technical matter to him.
Aaron often wrote candidly in his personal blog.
I think deeply about things, and I want others to do likewise. I work for ideas and learn from people. I don't like excluding people. I'm a perfectionist, but I won't let that get in the way of publication. Except for education and entertainment, I'm not going to waste my time on things that won't have an impact. I try to be friends with everyone, but I hate it when you don't take me seriously. I don't hold grudges. It's not productive, but I learn from my experience. I want to make the world a better place.
Yeah, y'all had to get rid of him. Y'all did. Y'all got rid of him.
In 2004, Schwartz leaves Highland Park and enrolls in Stanford University.
He had had ulcerative colitis, which was very troubling, and we were concerned about him taking his medication.
He got hospitalized, and he would take this cocktail of pills every day. And one of those pills was a steroid, which stunted his growth and made him feel different from many of the other students.
Aaron, I think, shows up at Stanford ready to do scholarship and finds himself in effectively a babysitting program for overachieving high schoolers who, in 4 years, are meant to become, captains of industry and one percenters. And I think it just made him bananas.
In 2005, after only 1 year of college, Schwartz was offered a spot at a new startup incubation firm called Y Combinator, led by Paul Graham.
And he's like, hey, I have this idea for a website. And Paul Graham likes him enough and says, yeah, sure. So Aaron drops out of school, moves to this apartment. So this used to be Aaron's apartment when he moved here. I have vague memories of my father telling me how difficult it was to get a lease. Because Aaron had no credit and he dropped out of college. Aaron lived in what's now the living room, and some of the posters are left over from when Aaron lived here. And then the library. There are more books, but a lot of them are Aaron's.
Aaron's Y Combinator site was called Infogami, a tool to build websites. But Infogami struggles to find users, and Schwartz eventually merges his company with another Y Combinator project in need of help. It was a project headed by Steve Huffman and Alexis Ohanian, called Reddit.
There we were, starting from almost nothing. No users, no money, no code, and growing day by day into a hugely popular website. And it showed no signs of letting up. First we had 1,000 users, then 10,000, then 20,000, and on and on. It was just incredible.
Reddit becomes huge, and it's a real sort of geeky corner of the internet. There's a lot of humor, there's a lot of art, and there's just people who flock to the site and make that site the main site they go to every morning to get their news. Reddit kind of just borders on chaos at some level. So on the one hand, it's a place where people discuss news of the day, technology, politics, and issues. And yet there is a lot of kind of not safe for work material, offensive material. There's some subreddits where trolls find a welcome home. And so in that sense, Reddit has been kind of home to controversy as well. It kind of sits on that edge of chaos.
Reddit catches the attention of the corporate magazine giant Condé Nast, who makes an offer to buy the company.
Some large amount of money, large enough that my dad was getting bugged with questions about, like, how do I store this money?
But like a lot of
money. Like, probably more than $1 million, but I don't actually know.
And he was how old at the time?
19, 20. So it was in this apartment. They like sat around on what predated these couches, hacking on Reddit. And when they sold Reddit, they threw a giant party, and then all flew out to California the next day and left the keys with me.
It was funny, you know, he just sold a startup, so we all kind of presumed he was the richest person around, but he said, oh no, I'll take this tiny little shoebox-sized room. That's all I need. Like, it was barely larger than a closet. The idea of him spending his money on fancy objects just seems so implausible.
He explains this like, I like living in apartments, so I'm not going to spend a lot of money on a new place to live. I'm not going to buy a mansion. And I like wearing jeans and a t-shirt, so I'm not going to spend any more money on clothes. So, like, it's, you know, really no big deal.
What is a big deal to Schwartz is how traffic flows on the internet and what commands our attention.
In the old system of broadcasting, you were fundamentally limited by the amount of space in the airwaves. You know, you could only send out 10 channels over the airwaves of television, right? Or even with cable, you had 500 channels. On the internet, everybody can have a channel. Everyone can get a blog or a MySpace page. Everyone has a way of expressing themselves. And so what you see now is not a question of who gets access to the airwaves. It's a question of who gets control over the ways you find people. You know, you start seeing power centralizing in sites like Google, these sort of gatekeepers that tell you where on the internet you want to go, the people who provide you your sources of news and information. So it's not, you know, only certain people have a license to speak. Now everyone has a license to speak. It's a question of who gets heard.
Now that's being censored. That's being censored by YouTube.
After he started working in San Francisco at Condé Nast, he comes into the office and they want to give him a computer with all this crap installed on it and say that he can't install any new things on his computer, which to a developer is outrageous, right? From the first day, he was complaining about all this stuff. Gray walls, gray desks, gray noise. The first day I showed up here, I simply couldn't take it. By lunchtime, I had literally locked myself in a bathroom stall and started crying. I can't imagine staying sane with someone buzzing in my ear all day, let alone getting any actual work done. Nobody else seems to get work done here either. Everybody's always coming into our room to hang out and chat or invite us to play the new video game system that Wired is testing.
He really had different aspirations that were politically oriented. And Silicon Valley just doesn't really quite have that culture that orients technical activity for the purposes of political goals.
Aaron hated working for a corporation. They all hate working for Condé Nast, but Aaron is like the only one who's not going to take it. And Aaron basically gets himself fired by not showing up to work ever.
It was said to be a messy breakup. Both Alexis Ohanian and Steve Huffman declined to be interviewed for this film.
He rejected the business world. One of the really important things to remember about that choice when Aaron decided to kind of leave startup culture is that he was also leaving behind the things that had made him, you know, famous and well-loved, and, you know, he was at risk of letting down fans.
He got to where he was supposed to be going and had the self-awareness and the orneriness to realize that he had climbed the mountain of shit to pluck the single rose and discovered that he'd lost his sense of smell. And rather than sit there and insist that it wasn't as bad as it seemed, and he did get the rose in any event, he climbed back down again, which is pretty cool.
The way Aaron always saw it is that programming is magic, right? You can accomplish these things that normal humans can't by being able to program. So if you had magical powers, would you use them for good or to make you mountains of cash?
We do it for good.
Schwartz was inspired by one of the visionaries he had met as a child, the man who had invented the World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee. In the 1990s, Berners-Lee was arguably sitting on one of the most lucrative inventions of the 20th century. But instead of profiting from the invention of the World Wide Web, he gave it away for free. It is the only reason the World Wide Web exists today.
Aaron is certainly deeply influenced by Tim. Tim is certainly a very prominent early internet genius who doesn't in any sense cash out. He's not at all interested in how he's going to figure out how to make $1 billion.
People would have seen, there's money to be made there. So there would have been lots of little webs instead of one big one. And one little web, lots of little webs doesn't work because you can't follow links from one to the other. You had to have the critical mass for this thing was in that. So it's not going to work unless the whole planet can get on board.
I mean, I feel very strongly that it's not enough to just live in the world as it is, to just kind of take what you're given and, follow the things that adults told you to do and that, your parents told you to do and that society tells you to do. I think you should always be questioning. I take this very scientific attitude that everything you've learned is just provisional, that, it's always open to recantation or refutation or questioning. And I think the same applies to society. Once I realized that there were real serious problems, fundamental problems that I could do something to address, I didn't see a way to forget that. I didn't see a way not to.
Because we've been lied to by adults. But I don't fault
you. We just started spending a lot of time just kind of as friends. We would just talk for hours into the night. I definitely should have understood that he was flirting with me. I think to some degree I was like, this is a terrible idea and impossible, and therefore I will pretend it is not happening. As my marriage was breaking down and I was really stuck without anywhere to go, we became roommates and brought my daughter over. We moved in and furnished the house, and it was really peaceful. Like, my life had not been peaceful for a while, and really neither had his. We were extremely close from the beginning of our romantic relationship. We were in constant contact, but we're both really difficult people to deal with. In a very Alan McBeal discussion, he confessed he had a theme song, and I made him play it for me. It was Extraordinary Machine by Fiona Apple. I think it was just that sense of kind of being a little bit embattled that the song has. And it also had like this hopefulness to it.
But it's a slow climb, but I'm good at being uncomfortable, so I can't stop changing all the time.
Because in many ways, Aaron was tremendously optimistic about life. Even when he didn't feel it, he could be tremendously optimistic about life.
What are you doing?
Flickr has video now.
Schwartz threw his energy into a string of new projects involving access to public information, including an accountability website called watchdog.net and a project called the Open Library.
So the Open Library project is a website that you can visit at openlibrary.org, and the idea is to be a huge wiki, an editable website with one page per book. So for every book ever published, we want to have a web page about it that combines all the information from publishers, from booksellers, from libraries, from readers, onto one site, and then gives you links where you can buy it, you can borrow it, or you can browse it. I love libraries. I'm the kind of person who goes to a new city and immediately seeks out the library. So that's the dream of Open Library, is building this website where both you can leap from book to book, from person to author, from subject to idea, go through this vast tree of knowledge that's been embedded and lost in big physical libraries that's hard to find, that's not very well accessible online, is really important because books are a cultural legacy. Books are the place people go to write things down, and to have all that swallowed up by one corporation is kind of scary.
how can you bring public access to the public domain? It may sound obvious that you'd have public access to the public domain, but in fact it's not true. So the public domain should be free to all, but it's often locked up. There's often, guard cages. It's like having a national park, but with a moat around it and gun turrets pointed out in case somebody might want to actually come and enjoy the public domain. One of the things Aaron was particularly interested in is bringing public access to the public domain. This is one of the things that got him into so much trouble.
I had been trying to get access to federal court records in the United States. What I discovered was a puzzling system called PACER, which stands for Public Access to Court Electronic Records. I started Googling, and that's when I ran across Carl Malamud.
Access to legal materials in the United States is a $10 billion per year business.
PACER is just this incredible abomination of government service. It's 10 cents a page. It's this most brain dead code you've ever seen. You can't search it. You can't bookmark anything. You got to have a credit card. And these are public records. It's U.S. district courts are very important. It's where a lot of our seminal litigation starts. Civil rights cases, patent cases, all sorts of stuff. And journalists and students and citizens and lawyers all need access to PACER, and it fights them every step of the way. People without means can't see the law as readily as people that have that gold American Express card. It's a poll tax on access to justice.
The law is the operating system of our democracy, and you have to pay to see it. That's not much of a democracy.
They make about $120 million a year on the PACER system, and it doesn't cost anything near that, according to their own records. In fact, it's illegal. The E-Government Act of 2002 states that the courts may charge only to the extent necessary in order to reimburse the costs of running PACER.
As the founder of public.resource.org, Malamud wanted to protest the PACER charges. He started a program called the PACER Recycling Project, where people could upload PACER documents they had already paid for to a free database so others could use them.
The PACER people were getting a lot of flack from Congress and others about public access. And so they put together this system. In 17 libraries across the country, there was free PACER access. That's one library every 22,000 square miles, I believe. So it wasn't really convenient.
I encouraged volunteers to join the so-called Thumb Drive Corps and download docs from the public access libraries, upload them to the PACER recycling site.
People take a thumb drive into one of these libraries and they download a bunch of documents and they send them to me. And nothing, it was just a joke. In fact, when you clicked on Thumb Drive Core, there was a Wizard of Oz, the Munchkins singing. So the little video clip came up.
We represent the lollipop, yeah.
But of course, I get this phone call from Steve Schultz and Aaron saying, gee, we'd like to join the Thumb Drive Corps.
Around that time, I ran into Aaron at a conference.
This is something that really has to be a collaboration between a lot of different people.
So I approached him and I said, hey, I'm thinking about an intervention on the PACER problem.
Schultz had already developed a program that could automatically download PACER documents from the trial libraries. Swartz wanted to take a look.
So I showed him the code, and I didn't know what would come next. But as it turns out, over the course of the next few hours at that conference, he was off sitting in a corner, improving my code, recruiting a friend of his that lived near one of these libraries to go into the library and to begin to test his improved code, at which point the folks at the courts realized something's not going quite according to plan.
And data started to come in and come in and come in, and soon there were 760 gigabytes of PACER docs, about 20 million pages.
Using information retrieved from the trial libraries, Swartz was conducting massive, automated parallel downloading of the PACER system. He was able to acquire nearly 2.7 million federal court documents, 20 million pages of text.
Now, I'll grant you that 20 million pages had perhaps exceeded the expectations of the people running the Pilot Access Project, but surprising a bureaucrat isn't illegal.
Aaron and Carl decided to go talk to the New York Times about what happened.
They also caught the attention of the FBI, who began to stake out Schwartz's parents' house in Illinois.
But I get a tweet from his mother saying, "Call me." It's like, oh my God, what the hell's going on here? And so I finally got a hold of Aaron, and you know, Aaron's mother was like, "Oh my God, FBI, FBI, FBI."
An FBI agent drives down our home's driveway trying to see if Aaron is like in his room. And I remember being home that day and wondering why this car was driving down our driveway and just driving back out. I was like, that's weird. Like 5 years later, I read this FBI file and I'm like, oh my